get by. It resides between my eyes. Walk through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Behdad Jamshidi of CJAM Marketing. You can check them out at CJAMmarketing.com. And before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes of the podcast people should check out. One big shout out to Chris Yates. That's how we met, actually, the founder of Rhodium Network. Check it out. That was a great episode. And since this is part of the Top Agency series, and I'll share a little bit, B has a unique perspective on agencies and has, I think, interviewed over 850 of them with his business. But some of the top ones, I had Jason Swank on. He talked about how he built his business to over 8 figures and sold it. I had Ian Garlic on, who runs Video Case Story. And BA, I would love to get unique perspectives. He comes from an entrepreneurial family, and his dad had a restaurant, and the restaurant had live dolphins in it, which is strange in itself. Is even more strange that restaurant was in Wisconsin. So that was definitely unique. Another one, Todd Taskey. Todd Taskey helps match private equity with agencies to help sell agencies. That's what he does. I don't know if you know Todd, but you guys would be good potential partners. So I'll have to send him this. But he basically has the Second Bite podcast, Second Bite, because they'll sell and then private equity sells again. Sometimes the founders make more on the second bite than they do on the first. So I wonder if you've seen some of those scenarios at this point with all the agencies. But check out that, many more on InspiredInsider.com. And this episode is brought to you by Rise25. Rise25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the strategy, the accountability, and the full execution. So, as you know, we're like the magic elves that run in the background to make it look easy for the host so they can create amazing content and run their business. So for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I know it is for you too. And I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire on this planet and share with the world what they're working on. So if you thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. I'm excited to introduce Behdad Jamshidi. He started CJAM Marketing, and after realizing that most companies don't know how to evaluate the value of a marketing agency or assess their own needs, he created this where he is a matchmaker. So he'll take a company, he'll take an agency, and he'll find that perfect mix of agency for that company so they can, fulfill their needs, have the expertise, and grow their business, essentially. So every business is different. So not only in their needs, but also their growth process. So it's not a one-size-fits-all scenario. So in the past 5 years, B's met with and assessed, I was mentioning, 850 plus marketing agencies. He's vetted them down to, maybe over 100, and their preferred partners that he's vetted across all different marketing niches. And after pairing hundreds of businesses with the right partners, he's found his skill set actually lies in the matchmaking process. So we're going to talk about how do you evaluate a marketing agency? When do you need an agency? And all of those questions that I'm sure you get a lot of, B. And he's been featured in MarketWatch, Bloomberg, National Post, Financial Post. And he's got a unique background, which we'll talk through. But B, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeremy. I'm excited.
So there is a video version if you're listening to the audio version. So I'm going to pull up B's website as we're talking, but just talk and start with CJAM Marketing and what you do.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I became a matchmaker. Originally, I was an engineer. I used to do sales engineering for a very long time. That's where I learned a lot of my business consulting experience. I used to work with businesses in the mid-market, 50 to 1,000 type employer range, and really just like understanding what's happening from a business sense and then building out roadmaps for them in technology. And on the marketing side, one once I built up that skill set of business consulting, sales, leadership, and technology experience, I got into the marketing world and I took that same skill set. But I realized, as you mentioned, marketing agencies don't understand business and businesses don't understand marketing. And I thought I could be the person in the middle where I'm doing the vetting. I'd find partners that I want to work with. And after I understand what a business truly needs, I could basically help connect them with the right marketing partners based on where they're at and where they're trying to go. And a lot of the times, most businesses need more than one partner. Typically, it's a mixture of 2 to 4. And that's where I kind of help guide and bridge that gap.
Talk about, I think it's like the equivalent of Verizon, right, in Canada that you worked for.
Yeah.
Talk about some of the lessons you learned in that position that you bring to just, the business acumen.
Yeah. So when I was working at TELUS is where I was working at, they put probably over $100,000 just in my training, from like conflict resolution to mediation training to storytelling to just like how enterprises need to work and all the different aspects to it. We got TOGAF training, ITIL training. Like, man, the amount of resources put into training us was very, very high. And so that kind of gave me a step up when I started getting into my own business, because I could see what I needed to do, right? Like, I am a solopreneur. I do have a team of 8 to 9 people working for me, but I do know where I need to head and what I need to do to set up systems and processes to kind of move things forward. And so that was one aspect. The other aspect is, when you work for TELUS, you talk to all sorts of different businesses, from retail to not-for-profits to senior homes to manufacturing. Just, you get such a breadth of knowledge and experience about how a lot of these industries run. So you start understanding the different business drivers and business aspects, what the CEO is looking for versus what their VP team is looking for, and looking how to cater that and how to communicate that to all aspects of the business. So it gave me so much value, because then when I'm talking to businesses now that aren't in the 50 to 1,000 type employer range, it's a lot easier to understand and move forward with it.
So I do want to talk about the evolution of CJAM, because it is a unique business model. But I do want to, you mentioned the conflict resolution, so I want to stick on that for a second. I'm curious, because this comes up a lot in business conversations, and I'm wondering, what have you learned in that sense, in the conflict resolution?
Yeah, the biggest thing for me in conflict resolution is making sure the other person feels heard. Like, that's the number one thing. A lot of the times, like, even if we aren't in the wrong, if you don't feel that if the other person doesn't feel that they've actually been heard, their emotions have been heard, that they've taken everything off the plate, they're not going to listen to you, right? And so this is what I actually see a lot of businesses and also agencies struggle with, is just that aspect of like conflict resolution, and knowing, okay, something's wrong here. Can I go into the talk, put my ego aside, put all the other stuff aside, understand what the other person is seeing, so I understand where they're coming from, so that once they get everything off their chest, I can come back and say, do you mind if I share kind of what happened from my side of the experience? Once someone feels heard, then they're open to listening to you. And I mean, this works for every other relationship too in life. And it's an extremely unique skill set and important skill set to have.
Love it. Yeah, that it's echoes. One of my favorite books was Never Split the Difference with Chris Voss. I had Chris Voss on as a guest, and he echoes all of those sentiments that you just talked about. So I love that. It's not, I would say it's simple to do. I'm not saying it's always easy, but it's a simple concept, because sometimes our ego gets in the way.
100%.
Talk about the evolution of CJAM, because it is a unique business model, and how you came to doing this.
Yeah. So originally when I started out, I was actually building out websites, doing Google Ads and SEO, and I was taking courses and all this different kind of stuff. So, after work and on the weekends, I'd be doing a lot of that work. I really quickly realized I hated doing 80-hour websites on the weekend. I was like, man, I don't want to do this. I did some Google Ads and SEO, and I was like, this is just a lot of work. And then I had someone say, hey, B, we already have a referral model set up. So if you want to send us like the websites, we'll give you a referral fee. So I was like, hold on a second. Like, I can just like set everything up and then like step away and get paid a referral fee for this. Like, okay, like this is an interesting model. Let's go through it. And as I did that, I started realizing that like specific agency, they said they could do Google Ads and SEO, but when the project was done on the website front and it passed off to the other things, I was like, you don't do Google Ads at the level you need to do it at, and you don't do SEO at that level. So my naive thinking was like, oh, maybe I'll just go find an agency that's really good at Google and SEO, and that solved that problem. It turns out that agency was really good at just building out creative and videos and that kind of stuff. And so I had this hope, and I was always asking myself the question, why have I met with over like 868 different marketing agencies? Because I've always had this hope of like, maybe I can find those like 10 solid partners that would solve all the world's problems. And to this point, I haven't been able to do that, right? Like that's why I've met with so many, because you need so many different partners to be able to help support a business. So that's kind of like how the evolution kind of went, and just kept adding partners and adding partners. And as customers would ask me for more and different things, my network kind of grew to the point where I could potentially find anything that someone asked me to find. And so now that this is where we are today, where I have met as many partners as I have, about 100 partners in the network. I'm constantly refining, and we'll talk a little bit about the future later, I'm sure. But now that's going to evolve into another way to make me even more efficient at what I do. But the one thing that I think is extremely important in my business, that a lot of marketplaces and things don't do, is that human interaction, like someone actually being the filter on both sides and making those relationship matches. I think that's what's missing in a lot of the solutions today, is that actual human aspect of it.
Talk about full service as a term. And I know you have a lot to say on this, and even instructive from like an agency perspective. And also from like someone looking for an agency perspective. Talk through what you've seen in when someone says full service.
Man, full service is like unicorn. It's a unicorn. If people are trying to find a full service marketing agency, I would say you're likely going to fail many, 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 many times. That's just kind of I've been in this world enough times to know that it just doesn't exist. What does exist though is that agencies are typically pretty good at 1 to 3 things, right? They might have some other stuff they do off the side, but if you're mentally comfortable with that, you're like, okay, well, they're really good at the 1 to 3 core services that I need. But let's say social media or influencer marketing is stuff that can be done at average just because we want to get it off the ground. Great, like hire that full service agency, right? But you have to go in with the mindset of understanding as a business owner, they're not going to be the top level at all of those things. Usually when I'm talking to agencies in the background, they'll show me a slide and they'll say, hey, here's the 9 things that we do, and we do these things really, really well. And I go, guys, listen, man, I've done enough of these interviews where I know you're only really good at 3. So tell me what those 3 are. And they go, well, listen, we don't tell customers this, but these are the 3 core services. The other 6 we do once they come in on these 3 services, we'll do the other stuff because they just want to do everything in one place. And that's really starts becoming a bit of a sticky point, right? Like they just want to take as many services from the customer as possible, so they don't ever have a chance of losing that customer if another agency says they can do it. But I think if you're working with really intelligent customers or businesses that know how to scale and work with agencies, they'll know like, hey, I'm using this agency for these 2 things, and I'm using this one for these 2 things, and I'm not going to overlap them because I know they can't be good at everything.
Talk about that for a second. How can agencies improve their marketing? Because as you just said, that agency you talk to has all of them listed on the website. Would they be better off just, I don't know, through your conversations with them? Do they realize, well, maybe we should literally, our messaging and everything should be towards those 2 things? Or how can agencies improve from that mindset of, well, I don't want to lose the client because they may be looking for all these things, but really highlight what we are absolutely best in class in?
Yeah, I think that's what separates like your average agencies with like your really good agencies, right? Like they know what they're good at, the really good agencies, and they don't go outside of it typically, right? Like they're like, we just do SEO and that's all we do. Or there's some that just do Google and email, for example, and that's all they do. And they'll say that to customers. And then they have other partners that they'll just refer out to. They'll say, hey, you're looking for this? I know you do this, Jeremy. Like you're like, I don't touch this stuff, so I'm going to pass it off to someone else, right? Like you stay in your zone of genius. Same thing for like the best agencies. They stay in their zone of genius. I would say the ones that are doing the other stuff, they're typically going to just be average agencies, right? And the way that I use them is like, okay, well, if I have a customer that's, at a level 0 or 1 of agency, I'm like, and they need multiple different things and they have no in-house resource, that's the time where it might make sense to do that. But as long as the customer is aware that like, hey, they're really good at these 2 things, these other stuff they can do, but at some point you're going to need to replace them for that aspect, right? And so it's really hard for a customer to be able to do that unless you truly know what agencies are good at, which is always why like one of the main questions I ask agencies is like, tell me your story. How did you build what you built? And you'll hear things like, well, I started out as an SEO person in an agency and I started with that. And then we added paid media. And now we're adding these things over the last like year. And you're like, okay, these are new services. Don't mess with those, right? Stick with the core stuff. And just some insights of like how you might be able to identify when an agency is telling the truth and what services they're actually good at.
There was a instance where you had a serial entrepreneur. It was involving a service-based business in PI. Can you talk a little bit about that and what happened with that?
Yeah, this is really cool because I was part of a community at some point called Trends, which is no longer there. They were purchased by HubSpot and they disappeared. But in that group, a lot of people kind of knew who I was and what I did. So whenever someone would ask for some sort of marketing thing, they'd be like, just go talk to B. He knows it. And my customer there, like that's how we met. And it was kind of cool. He's like, hey, I've been hearing your name everywhere. I have this like business where we help basically personal injury lawyers with their clients, basically helping them take them to appointments, for example, so that if they're injured, they can get their settlement afterwards. Like, why are you driving a car? I thought you said your back, you couldn't move, right? That kind of thing. And so he built a service around this. And he's like, look, I don't know how to reach this audience. And I was like, well, it's really hard to reach that audience, right? They're very referral based. They're not all over the place. So I said, maybe social media might work, or maybe this thing might work, and I can make some intros for you. And I was like, but no promises. Like, this is a very hard match, and I don't know if I'll find the right match for you. Turns out, this was like over 3 years ago now. Matched him with a social media agency. He's still using them. They actually recommended that he build a podcast for personal injury lawyers. So back to what Jeremy does, makes sense. And
were that agency, were they doing paid ads? Is that what they were doing?
Social media, just like organic social.
Organic social. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Working on organic social stuff. And what was cool is like out of that one relationship, he actually has like 4 other businesses. So he's a pharmacist originally, but became a serial entrepreneur. There was a time during COVID where COVID tests were basically free to give to the public as long as they had, I think it was like Medicare or Medicaid or whatever it was. And he's like, B, I need some help here. Like, do you have any resources that can help me build out this landing page, help with copy? We need to conversion rate optimization this. We don't have a ton of time. We only have a 5-month runway at max. And then he also asked for influencer marketing agencies. So I gave him like 3 influencer marketing agencies, a copywriter. We built up the landing page, and he literally on video said, well, we did over 10 million and 3 million in profits just from like those relationships that you helped me connect with. And every single one of those relationships I gave to him in less than 2 days. Like, that's how fast he was moving. And he's used me for multiple others. I give him email marketing partners now. We're doing development-based stuff for his other business in the pharmaceutical space. Like, just, it's kind of cool just being able to work with someone like that, because they'll be like, B, you got someone for this? And I'll either say yes or no. And we built that kind of relationship where he's like, when you do, you help me move really fast.
Influencer agency stuff kind of fascinates me. It feels like a shortcut. Can you talk about some of the results and things you've seen people working with influencer agencies and how it worked a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, influencer marketing is all about just using someone else's audience that they've already established. It's very similar to podcasting, right? Like, it's not that much different. And so if someone has the right audience and you're able to find the right influencer combos, I've seen a lot of businesses, like e-com businesses, like running off like one really solid influencer. Like, the influencer has millions of people following them, and they're just running them to this one product, for example, right? And so those relationships can really work. But when you're looking at influencer marketing agencies, you have to realize that they have their own relationships, right? So that's why, like, my customer was like, hey, I want as many influencer marketing agencies as you could possibly get me, because I know each of them are going to have different relationships in different areas. And so I want to maximize on all those relationships, which is really smart, right? So if you're like an e-com brand, if you're a B2B brand, if there's certain influencers that have your target audience, like, building the relationship with those influencers and building some sort of affiliate play or something like that could really boost a business forward pretty quickly without having to spend as much on ads. And you might even be able to tie it to actual results.
So I'm sure you get this question a lot, or people are thinking about it. So there's 2 kind of questions. Is one, when should someone use an agency versus in-house? And then I know you have a separate kind of thought process and ideas around when you are going to use an agency. There's different levels of agencies. So I wanted to start with kind of the first question, which is, companies are probably thinking this, whether they say it to us or not, which is like, are we going to use an agency or are we going to do this ourselves? Right? So at what point do you say, okay, when should a company use an agency? And maybe you could define what type of companies come to you, like what size and type of companies are really a good fit to come to you and go, hey, B, we need help.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me answer the first question of like when to use in-house, when to use agency. So I kind of think it like this. If you have no internal resources, right, in the marketing space, like typically you want to outsource and you want to outsource to one agency. Even if that one agency is only good at 1 to 3 things and does the other stuff off the side of the table, at least they can kind of be that bridge to bring a lot of the things together. So like until you get to a certain point where you can hire some in-house people. And so a lot of what I see is like the first hire is either going to be like a marketing director, or you get to like hiring a fractional CMO that can then hire that marketing director, right? So once you have 1 or 2 people internally, and the way that I would hire internally for that is like hire people that understand overall marketing. And then as you feed them partners or freelancers, they can basically manage bringing all those people together, right? And typically if you're hiring like a marketing director, they might be good at like copywriting or they might be good at other stuff. So you can maximize on what they're good at and then outsource the other stuff. As you get into becoming a bigger company, right? Like now you have 5 or 6 in-house resources, or some teams have like 30. Now you start hiring very niche type agencies where you're like, well, we're not going to build an entire SEO team in-house, or we're not going to build out the entire video team in-house. So we're going to hire for that. And we have a social media team in-house to basically take all that stuff, guide it, and then use it, right? So you become much more niche in that perspective. And the other thing that I would say is if a core marketing service is really, really important to your business, like I know this one business and they're massive on social media, right? Like over 1 million plus followers. You're not going to hire an agency for that. Like you need to hire the internal resources to be able to manage that because you need to iterate really, really fast. And you need someone that really understands your business, is working on it 24/7. So those are some of the ways to think about how to hire in-house versus outsource. And there are some like unique edge cases where most people might not know about. Like for example, I know an agency out of Germany that works with enterprise type customers, and they're basically slot in as the design team. So as you work with different agencies, they're in the middle. They built out software where they will literally just interact with the agency and the customer to say, okay, well, we need this brochure to look like this, or we need this video to look like this. We need this landing page to look like this. They do all of the creative in the middle because they have a team kind of like plugged into it. They do over 44,000 assets for one company in a year. Like that's efficiency you can never get if you're trying to do it in-house, right? Like it's really hard. Or there's like an agency, for example, that has built out their teams in a way that you can almost like mix and match them. So if you're already a business, like franchise-based business, you have an in-house team, but you're like I said, you don't want to build an SEO or social media team. They will actually input a pod into your company that works with your internal team. So you don't have to go and hire all those resources yourself. They typically charge anywhere between 10 and 15 grand retainers, but imagine trying to hire 3 to 5 different people, full-time salary, all that stuff that comes with that. That's another like model too, right? So there are some like really unique type agencies that most people don't know about that might be useful. Hope that answered that first question.
Yeah, and that's what you get with, I mean, an agency in general is the specialization, and you don't have to hire full-time or multiple full-time people, and you get someone who's already an expert and has the process and systems.
Exactly. That's exactly it, right? You don't have to like build that in-house. And then to your other question was kind of like what kind of businesses like really work well with me. It's pretty much businesses that are scaling, like anywhere from 3 million to 30 million is like a real sweet spot for me, right? Because you get to a point, you have product market fit, you know that you need the right partners in place to kind of get to that next level, and you're basically bringing in your leadership layer. And so I work really well with those types of customers. But I also have larger customers in the 60 million, $150 million range. And I don't play a lot in the enterprise space, but I do know that in like the enterprise space, there's pods and teams that need certain things done. And the people within those teams don't have the resources or the network to find what they need to find. So they typically just search on Google for a branding or a website agency or an app agency. And that's kind of how they do it. And there are a lot of times where you end up failing your projects because of that.
What type of questions do you get from those companies? I know you also talk a lot about this, some specific questions a company should ask, like an interviewing guide. If you want to talk through a few of those questions, then we could talk, what other questions are these companies asking you?
Yeah, so they don't ask me specifically, but they're asking kind of like the agencies. So I built a guide. What I realized was that like customers, when they're going to meeting agencies, there's no set questions they're asking. Like it's very high level. It's kind of off the cuff. No one actually has like an interview guide going into a lot of these agency meetings. And I'm sure you probably, how many customers have you had that came to you with what looked like a pretty set question guide that they're going to ask you?
None.
Right? Like zero. And how long have you been doing what you're doing for?
Long time.
Right? So that's what like blows my mind. I'm like, you're about to hire an agency and it's a $300,000 project and you don't even have like a set guideline to compare these agencies to apples. And so one of the things that I thought was like, okay, well, I'm asking these agencies these questions. There's even deeper questions I want to ask, but I just don't have the time to vet every single one as deeply as I want to. So what if I gave these questions to my customers, right? Like what if I gave these questions to companies that want to hire agencies, whether it's like a website agency or an SEO agency or email? I started with a lot of the core five services, and then I'm going to expand on it if everyone likes it. But it was to basically take these guides and go, I'm going to ask these questions, and the questions go from basic to advanced to if you're hiring for ecom to if you're to know about operations. And if you can ask the agencies these questions, you're going to be much better off figuring out who actually knows what they're talking about versus who's just kind of like a good salesperson.
Totally. You have this intel because you do talk to a lot of agencies. And so people always, and myself included, always geek out on different software tools, resource, and things like that. So I figured I'd start with top project management tools that you like, and then maybe we can just talk through other, software tools that you're seeing that are popular in the agency space. I was reading through this blog here, which is really good. People, if you're watching the video or listening to the audio, it's cjammarketing.com. You can go to their blog. They have a lot of great resources here. And we're on PM tools, project management tools. And so you can see a list here. I don't know if I'm just curious, your personal favorites, what you like to use. We're seeing Jira, ClickUp, Monday, Asana.
Yeah, so I'll tell you the two biggest ones that I hear agencies using. Like ClickUp is like by far one that like stands out when it comes to project management. Like
We use ClickUp.
agencies, ClickUp's the one. And I use ClickUp within my agent. That was actually one of the reasons why I chose ClickUp for my own team. That's number one. Asana comes in number two. And then the third one is like not even on this list, but it's not even coming to the top of my head. But there's another platform that agencies use, but ClickUp for sure, number one, Asana number two, and then it goes from there. And then it just depends on the agency when you're using them, like if they're going to be using things like Slack for communication, or is it just email based, right? Like usually if you're working with more enterprise, larger customers, things typically stick in email because that's just how the world works in that space. But then there's some agencies that use Slack a lot, which is, I think most people kind of understand that space. Zoom is another huge one. Like I've seen that used way more than like Google Meet or, Microsoft Teams is there too, but that's also, once again, on the larger side of things. The other thing I'm kind of seeing, and I mean, everyone's seeing the AI stuff happening, right? So, people are using it for content creation and all that different kind of stuff. But what I'm starting to see is like branding agencies using it to basically create mock-ups in less than 6 minutes that would have taken 3 to 4 weeks to do before, like mood boards, right? Like create me 4 different mood boards that have this, and this, and try these different colors. And you can do that in such less time. So the amount of efficiency that these agencies are going to have is going to be way higher. Don't know if the cost is going to be passed off to the customer, but at least you can finish projects faster.
Yeah. Any other apps or software that you like personally?
It's a good question.
It could be productivity related too. It doesn't have to be business. If there's just apps or things that you use.
Oh
daily.
man, there's like I use different tools like I'm using different course-based stuff. So one of them is Mindvalley, like for courses. And I'm doing like a quantum leap thing there. Like I really like the meditation aspect of that. I use like Calm, that kind of stuff. Not nothing crazy. I do a lot of journaling, like presently is an app just to get journaling in what's going on in my mind. One of the ways that I use, for example, OneNote, and people use Evernote and all this other stuff. But I have a whole system of like OneNote of like just journaling throughout business, right? Like, if you're having a hard time or if you're having a great month or whatever it is, like I've like categorized all that stuff, which has been used for me to build out content. And so another thing that I use ClickUp for that I don't think most people use it for outside of project management is just like managing my entire social media presence, right? So I have like all my video editing in there. I have all my posts in there, all categorized so that my social media manager can grab stuff and basically post on my behalf, but it's all my thoughts, all my ideas. But I just made it so much more efficient so that I can be across 5 different channels without having to spend, 10, 20, 30 hours a month for it.
Love it. Yeah, we're big, heavy ClickUp users, and it's been Awesome. We use Suite Process for SOP like related kind of a centralized database with ClickUp, and we love it.
Yeah.
Talk about you had a client who sold their home service business. Can you talk about that case?
Yeah, that was a really cool case too. Once again, someone mentioned me in a group and we're like, hey, you should talk to B about what you want to do, because they wanted to build out a website. It turns out that like halfway through, the person that they hired like just was like, man, I can't do this anymore. I got a lot of stuff going on. I got to leave. Like, so one of the things happens when you hire a freelancer, like that kind of stuff does happen.
I hear that all the time. Not even that. It's just someone just ghosts and they don't even return the person's call. I've heard that numerous times too.
Yeah. So he had a scenario where that exact thing happened. And he's like, look, like, this is all the files we have. This is all the things we do. Like, we need to get this up and running. Like, do you know a partner to do that? And they just recently exited and they wanted to get into like the e-com space. It's more for fun for them. Like they bought another business. They're not starting from scratch. They bought another business. The other business didn't have enough revenue to buy enough stock. And so they were like, well, we just finished this business. Let's have some fun with this new one. And midway through, they lost their developer. And so I was able to help connect them with a marketing partner, like literally within 4 days. I was like, well, sent this to like 6 different partners. Hey, who can do this? What price point? This is the kind of range that he's comfortable with, and matched him with that. And then turns out he also was building another home service based business at the same time. So we ended up doing 2 projects out of one. Comes back 2 months later and says, hey, B, the website is almost complete and done. Can we chat about what else I need? And so we had a talk around like all the different avenues of like how people typically grow on e-commerce, whether it's paid ads, if you have money, like that's typically how you fast track things. And then making sure that you have a solid foundation of like, when you get to spending paid ads, you have to have a solid email flow and solid campaign email ideas so that you can just basically upsell as you go through and as you bring new products out. And so once again, within a week, gave them a bunch of options, ended up hiring 2 different partners for me on that one, an email partner, and then one that's going to be doing paid ads and SEO. And he's been running with them for the last 3-4 months. Checked in on him. He's like, man, they're doing a great job. So I'm happy with what's going on there.
Love it. We were talking about the full service agency myth, I guess we'll call it. What other, if you've talked to, it's almost 1,000 at this point, one-on-one. What are some of the other mistakes you see agencies making?
Communication is number one. Like that is the biggest one. I've noticed that a lot of agencies, especially if you're working with like smaller ones, let's say sub 20, people, a lot of them don't have sales experience or just like haven't worked in a professional environment long enough. So a lot of things that get missed is just in communication. Like, we were talking about conflict resolution and mediation and all that different kind of stuff. Like those foundations aren't there. And so what ends up happening though, is even on the customer side, sometimes that's not there, right? Like people are building out businesses. They don't have enough time to communicate. They don't have enough time to say, hey, I don't like the way you did that thing. I'd rather it be done this way. Or can I put some input in there? And so the biggest like breakage is in just knowing how to communicate with people, knowing how to disarm, and just being able to like have a heart-to-heart talk and build an actual relationship. Like that's number one, I think the biggest problem agencies have, outside of like taking on stuff that they shouldn't take.
So taking on stuff they shouldn't take, just being very clear with communication. Anything else you see by talking to these agencies that maybe people can improve on?
Yeah. So when an agency is growing too fast, like that's the other thing. Like agencies are not scalable businesses. Like I've said this on other podcasts and I'll continue saying it. It's a service-based business, right? So typically agency businesses are going to grow at 10 to 15% a year, right? And so when you start hearing things like, oh, we grew 100% last year, we're about to grow 100% this year, another 100% next year. And I'm like, man, like you're going to break. Like in my head, I'm like, you're going to break. This is not going to work. And so once you break, you're going to learn that you have to have systems and processes because you can't hire fast enough and you can't hire the level of quality you want to make sure the agency doesn't break. And so that's another like just red flag to look for. Like when someone like tuning on how fast they're growing, I would probably walk the other way. And a lot of the times, like this isn't my area of expertise, but I know that a lot of agencies make 8 figures, but they're not profitable, right? Like they might be building so that they can sell at some point, but they don't build their agencies profitably, which makes it really, really tough as you're growing. it's not
Talk about that for a second, the profitability, right? Because I was actually discussing this with someone yesterday, and there was a lot. We did a podcast for like an e-commerce conference, and we were running one of these e-commerce groups, and people had huge numbers. Some of the people, like, they're doing 10, 20, 50 million, but their profit maybe 3% on some of these types of businesses. So it's interesting. What are some of the things you see that would improve their profitability? Is it their pricing? Like, what is causing these agencies to not be profitable?
Yeah. So one is, like you said, pricing. So people don't know how to price themselves appropriately. But at the same time, like, they just don't know because they don't know what the market is, right? Like, so they're competing all the time. Like, well, I lost that deal, must have been pricing. I lost this deal, must have been pricing. But like, no, it's actually on your sales delivery. You didn't hit the core things. You don't understand what they actually really wanted, right? So they don't look at all the other things that could potentially be affected. So they think it's pricing. So the next time they price it less. And then what ends up happening is you take on a project and then you go, well, it should have been, a $60,000 project, but I quoted 40. Now I'm losing money on this project because it should have been a $60,000 project. The other thing is like just scope, right? Like, when it comes to projects, like, having very clear scope in your contracts. And as soon as something's outside your scope of project, you should be charging for it. There should be something there. And you should be, that once again comes back to communication with the customer. Hey, this was our scope of thing. We're going outside of this now. We're going to need to charge if you want us to continue doing the thing. Do you want us to continue doing it? Or do you want us to stick to what we originally scoped out? Like, it's very simple, like, business type stuff that I don't think people understand. Like, just do those simple things well, and your business will be profitable. Yeah.
What are some good ways you've seen agencies handle that scope creep? Because I'll put a scenario. Someone is like, oh my God, B introduces these people. We want to do good by B. Also, we want to do good by the client. And, so we'll just do these couple things, even though it's not in our scope. Right.
Yeah.
So what are some good, in my mind, like, I think most people, they want to over deliver as much as possible. Also, we don't want to be unprofitable, or that's not sustainable. What are some good ways you've seen agencies approach that, like, scope creep conversation or issue?
Yeah, I mean, just be upfront about it. Like, don't just like do it and then go afterwards and be like, hey, we went above and beyond for you after the fact. Like, just go like, hey, I know you're asking for X. Like, we think that, we'll put 5 hours towards it, but anything above that, like, we're going to need to, like, charge for it. Like, if you know that they could get out of hand, like, put a limit to it. Like, just say, yeah, we'll do that. We'll spend the 5 hours, but just realize after 5 hours, we're going to need to charge moving forward, right? Like, that kind of thing. So that customers know that it's just outside of the scope of work. But if you just do it and you go back and go, look at all the stuff that I did for you. Like, why don't you realize all the stuff that I did for you? It's because you didn't set that up front that, hey, yeah, we're doing you a favor. And here's the, don't know the word for it, but here's the, what's the word when you say, hey, the condition. Here's the condition of that favor. And then afterwards, then you set up the expectations properly up front so that you can charge after the fact, right? But even before that, like, set that up in your contract. Like, if a project, for example, let's say it's a website project or a branding project, say, hey, we've done this scope of work. We think it's going to take this range of hours. If it goes above the top range of hours, which it usually doesn't, 95% of the time it doesn't. But if it does, at that point, when we're 10% close to that, we're going to let you know so that we either have to close the project pretty quickly, or we have to be prepared that there's going to be an additional fee to this project.
Love it. Yeah, because that's why it's called scope creep, because it keeps creeping if you let it come in.
Yeah.
First of all, I have one last question. Before I ask it, I want to point people to check out CJAMmarketing.com to learn more. And my question is on, you obviously take different courses, books. I'm curious your favorite resources, whether it's books, it's podcasts, it's a course that you took. What are some of your favorites?
Yeah, so I've read a lot of books over the last while. Like, there's a point in my life where my goal was to read 60 books in 5 years, and I did it in 3.6. So that was fun. I still continue reading. Right now, some of my favorite, I'll tell you, one of my authors that I'm really liking right now is like Matt Haig. I really like his books. And they're just around just self-discovery, growth, and just like really good storytelling. Like I read a lot of nonfiction, but I'm starting to realize like fiction has a lot of power when stories are said well. Like it just kind of like passes your logical brain and really sits in the subconscious. So that's one. Another
How do you
thing that
spell the last name? Do you know?
Matt Haig, Haig.
H-I-G. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm really liking his books. In terms of courses, I actually signed up for a program recently that's like $15,000 on and learning how to build out like an attractive character, how to dress that attractive character, and doing that right now. So that's just learning about.
Is that
like,
through a platform or just an individual?
No, there's an individual. Yeah, it's an individual part.
So is your wife going to determine if it's successful or not? Or
I guess you will. Yeah. But the cool part is like you can create the attractive character across everything, right? Like you can do it for business, but then you can do it for like I have what I call a Sunday Behdad. It's like the chill, not have to think about work, like, you know, enjoying time off. Like you can create these different versions for different aspects of your life and then kind of step into those characters depending on what you need to do, for example. So doing that, I'm in the middle of it. I'll give you a review after when I'm
what
done.
made you decide to do that course?
I love to grow, like this learning and growing. So there's a couple aspects of it. One, I was afraid of spending the $15,000 on one program. Like, you know, I'm cool with spending 3 to 5, but like 15 is getting up there at this point. But I also knew that back in the day, I was afraid to spend $3,000 to $5,000 on something, right? And so getting through that fear, that was one of the main things. 2 was I trusted the person that's running it. Like I was like, okay, I want to get closer to him. I want to understand more about what he does and how he does it. And 3, I'm like, stuff that I'm going to learn is going to be super valuable for me to be able to share with other business owners and things like that. So for me, it's always just about like growth and learning, and I can afford it. So why not do it? And if it's just fear that's stopping it, that's why I push through it. So in September, I'm actually going to Vegas to learn how to dress this attractive character and learn the psychology of it. So that's going to be pretty fun.
It's like literally meaning like what you should wear. Is that? Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. I don't know enough yet to share more, but once I do learn more, I'll share it.
I'm sure my wife would love for me to be in that. She's like, you dress terribly. But thanks for sharing that. Who should be contacting you from like the business side and also the agency side? I know you have an agency network within CJAM.
Yeah. So on the business side, basically it's founders or people that are running the marketing division. That's just typically who I talk to on that side. And on the agency side, it's founders. Sometimes I'll work with like larger agencies and you're talking to the partnership person, but I always have to meet the founders because their personality and their values literally run through the entire company. So those are
Are there certain size agencies or types of niche agencies? I know at this point you have a lot in your arsenal. What does that look like?
Yeah, for me, like I have agencies across pretty much everything at this point, but I'm always looking for stronger and stronger agencies. Like for me, like I want to build the best network possible of the best people possible. So typically what I say, like even in my onboarding form that's coming up pretty soon on the website, it's like, are you in the top 15% of what you do? And if you're not, like, don't reach out to me because you're not going to fit my network. So if you're really good at like small business for X, cool. If you're really good at like mid-market SEO and you're in the top 15%, cool. Like I want to talk to the people that are like really care about what they do, want to make sure their customers are winning and have basically the drive and the will to want to run an agency. I'm not looking for people that are like, I'm growing this agency for 2 years and I'm out afterwards. Like that's not an interest to me.
Yeah, I want to be the first one to thank you. Thanks for sharing the knowledge. This has been really instructive. People can check out cjammarketing.com to learn more. And we'll see everyone next time. B, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
Thanks, everyone.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like $100 grand.